This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
And we are coming on the air right now because President Obama is about to speak from Martha's Vineyard on the execution of American journalist James Foley by the Islamic militants fighting in Iraq and Syria. Foley was reporting for the online news service Global Post when he was kidnapped in northern Syria on Thanksgiving Day 2012. In the video released by the militant group ISIS, which we will not show in full, just these still photos that we're going to show you right now, he's forced to read a letter condemning America before the hooded executioner, speaking with a British accent, beheads him. In retaliation, he said, for U.S. airstrikes in Iraq. The militant also claims to be holding another American journalist, Stephen Joel Sotloff, who went missing in Syria last year. Sotloff's fate, declared the executioner, will depend on President Obama's next move. ABC's chief White House correspondent John Carl is with the president. And John, U.S. intelligence has concluded, sadly, that this video is authentic.
U.S. intelligence confirmed the authenticity of the video this morning, and unfortunately, George, it was not a surprise. A senior U.S. official tells me that the U.S. government had received a warning from the captors, from Foley's captors, saying that he would be executed in retaliation for U.S. airstrikes in Iraq. So apparently they carried through on that threat. Now, George, the president spoke to Foley's parents a short time ago. I'm told right now he will offer a message of condemnation and resolve, condemning the attacks and a resolve to continue the fight against this terrorist group, saying this act of terror, this act of horror confirms the very reasons for why the U.S. is involved in this campaign against ISIS in Iraq. And
we will hear from Foley's parents after the president. Diane and John Foley speaking to reporters outside their home. Here comes the president now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today, the entire world is appalled by the brutal murder of Jim Foley by the terrorist group ISIL. Jim was a journalist, a son, a brother, and a friend. He reported from difficult and dangerous places, bearing witness to the lives of people a world away. He was taken hostage nearly 2 years ago in Syria, and he was courageously reporting at the time on the conflict there. Jim was taken from us in an act of violence that shocks the conscience of the entire world. He was 40 years old, one of 5 siblings, the son of a mom and dad who worked tirelessly for his release. Earlier today, I spoke to the Foleys and told them that we are all heartbroken at their loss and join them in honoring Jim and all that he did. Now, Jim Foley's life stands in stark contrast to his killers. Let's be clear about ISIL. They have rampaged across cities and villages, killing innocent, unarmed civilians in cowardly acts of violence. They abduct women and children and subject them to torture and rape and slavery. They have murdered Muslims, both Sunni and Shia, by the thousands. They target Christians and religious minorities, driving them from their homes, murdering them when they can, for no other reason than they practice a different religion. They declared their ambition to commit genocide against an ancient people. So ISIL speaks for no religion. Their victims are overwhelmingly Muslim, and no faith teaches people to massacre innocents. No just God would stand for what they did yesterday and what they do every single day. ISIL has no ideology of any value to human beings. Their ideology is bankrupt. They may claim out of expediency that they are at war with the United States or the West, but the fact is they terrorize their neighbors and offer them nothing but an endless slavery to their empty vision and the collapse of any definition of civilized behavior. And people like this ultimately fail. They fail because the future is won by those who build and not destroy, and the world is shaped by people like Jim Foley and the overwhelming majority of humanity who are appalled by those who killed him. The United States of America will continue to do what we must do to protect our people, We will be vigilant and we will be relentless. When people harm Americans anywhere, we do what's necessary to see that justice is done, and we act against ISIL, standing alongside others. The people of Iraq, who with our support are taking the fight to ISIL, must continue coming together to expel these terrorists from their communities. The people of Syria, whose story Jim Foley told, do not deserve to live under the shadow of a tyrant or terrorists. They have our support in their pursuit of a future rooted in dignity. From governments and peoples across the Middle East, there has to be a common effort to extract this cancer so that it does not spread. There has to be a clear rejection of these kind of nihilistic ideologies. One thing we can all agree on is that a group like ISIL has no place in the 21st century. Friends and allies around the world, we share a common security and a common set of values that are rooted in the opposite of what we saw yesterday, and we will continue to confront this hateful terrorism and replace it with a sense of hope and civility. That's what Jim Foley stood for. A man who lived his work, who courageously told the stories of his fellow human beings, and who was liked and loved by friends and family. Today, the American people will all say a prayer for those who love Jim. All of us feel the ache of his absence. All of us mourn his loss. We keep in our prayers those other Americans who are separated from their families. We will do everything that we can to protect our people and the timeless values that we stand for. May God bless and keep Jim's memory, and may God bless the United States of America.
President Obama clearly seething with anger, speaking out against the execution of James Foley, saying it is appalled and shocks the conscience of the entire world by these ISIS militants fighting now in Iraq and Syria. I'm joined by our chief investigative correspondent, Brian Ross. And Brian, the president speaking out against ISIS, saying they speak for no religion at all, but this has become perhaps the most fierce and well-financed terrorist group in the world.
Absolutely. As the president said, no just God understands what happened there. But they have again and again been able to amount huge amounts of money, recruiting thousands of fighters, including from the West, to join in their battle. First in Syria, now in Iraq. It's almost unaccountable.
You say from the West. We have heard that executioner. British accent. British Prime Minister David Cameron has gone back to deal with this in London today.
In fact, today they're poring over the video, looking for clues as to the identity of this executioner, looking closely at his eyes, his hands, and most distinctly, as you say, George, his voice, which seems to have either an East London or South London distinctive accent. And the British authorities are comparing that voice to voice tracks they have of British detainees who are in Guantanamo and others who they believe have gone to Syria to join ISIS.
ABC's chief global affairs correspondent Martha Raddatz also with us. The president not backing down one bit, Martha, saying the United States will do what it must do. We will be vigilant, he said, and relentless.
And clearly these airstrikes will continue, and they have made progress in Iraq. Yesterday, the Pentagon saying that ISIS morale is suffering, their competency and capacity has been damaged. But the president has said again and again that these strikes will not solve the problem.
Okay, Martha Raddatz and Brian Ross, thank you very much. Before we go, we do want to show James Foley's parents. As the president said, he spoke with them earlier today, and they spoke to reporters outside their home in Rochester just moments ago.
We're very proud of Jim. You know, he was a courageous, fearless journalist, a very compassionate American. I mean, the best of America. And he always hoped that he would come home. That was his hope, and he sustained all the others who were with him really with that hope.
But before coming home, he wanted to support his fellow inmates. He was always the first guy in line, the one who would take the bullet first, the one who would speak to the guards about inequities in food. He was never a slacker. He was always the standard, the bearer, the stand-up guy, you know, which was his passion. That's what he wanted to do for others. That's what he wanted to do for his fellow journalists. We also appreciate the tremendous number of prayers that we've received, and Jimmy received throughout all of our communities. Jimmy had said in Libya, and we're very sure now, that he could feel the prayers, and we think his strength came from God.
Well, we know it did. As a matter of fact.
And as President Obama said, the thoughts and prayers of America with the family of James Foley today. That's all for us right now. We're going to continue live streaming this special report online. Diane Story will be back with a full report later on World News, and you can get the latest news anytime by starting this story on the ABC News mobile app, along with personalized alerts throughout the day. I'm George Stephanopoulos in New York. Have a good day.
And I am Martha Raddatz with continuing coverage on the execution of James Foley and the statement just a while ago by President Obama. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, John Carl. John, you mentioned that there was a warning to the White House before this execution. Can you tell us any more about that, how they got that warning?
Well, we know that the warning was not through public channels, Martha, so there was some kind of a private channel directly to the captors of Mr. Foley. And this warning, I'm told, was very recent, no real time to act on in any way, not necessarily that they would have. But when the execution, when this video appeared, it was certainly no surprise. It took a little while for the intelligence community to formally authenticate it, but they really knew that this was the real deal when they saw it. And as you know, the president was briefed on this almost in real time. He was briefed while he was flying on Air Force One to the rest of his vacation here in Martha's Vineyard. And this, I can tell you right now, is front and center of the president's agenda right now. And you saw, I think, some of the most passionate words we have seen from the president on the issue of terrorism, period, since the beginning of his presidency.
And we've been conducting these airstrikes for almost 2 weeks now, and probably close to 100 airstrikes. But the president has said again and again that will not solve the problem of ISIS. He said one of the mission's goals is to contain ISIS. So what else might they do, John?
Well, the key factor here now is getting international focus on this group. And interestingly, Martha, the president will be chairing a meeting of heads of states, members of the UN Security Council in just a few weeks. And the number one issue on the agenda for that summit of world leaders, members of the Security Council, will be fighting foreign terrorists and, of course, front and center of that, fighting ISIS. But also a major focus on the Iraqi government. The message from the White House over and over again on this is that, as you said, airstrikes alone will not defeat this group. The United States alone will not defeat this group. This will take an international effort. I have not heard a lot of specific ideas, however, beyond urging the Iraqis to take the fight to ISIS and continuing this campaign of airstrikes.
I want to bring in Brian Ross, our chief investigative reporter. Brian, this international effort certainly right now involves the British because of that British accent and what they're finding about that executioner.
That's right, Martha. In fact, British authorities tell us there could be as many as 250 British citizens who have gone to fight in Syria, many of them, if not most of them, with the ISIS group. Clearly, the executioner in the video that shows the death of James Foley spoke with a distinct British accent. People who have studied this say he is a native English speaker. This is of great concern in Britain, and they are going through now a database of voices they have of Brits who are held as detainees in Guantanamo, and others they believe have gone off to Syria, trying to figure out the identity of the person who took the knife to the throat of Jim Foley.
And I also want to bring in Terry Moran, our chief foreign correspondent, who is in Iraq. And Terry, you've been on the ground with the Kurdish soldiers trying to push back the ISIS militants, and they have made progress.
They have, Martha, and one of the things they'll tell you, though, right off the bat is that they would not have been able to gain an inch of ground, despite the legendary bravery of the Peshmerga, as the Kurdish soldiers are called, without U.S. air power. It was U.S. airstrikes that plowed the road and made it possible for the Kurds and Iraqi special forces to advance and retake Mosul Dam. That was the first big defeat for ISIS. One of the things you hear throughout this region, I was here in June when ISIS swept down through Mosul. And I'm here again, you hear in the villages that they have emptied and terrorized. You hear from Kurds, Yazidis, and Christians. These guys are different. They're worse. This is unimaginable brutality. And for them, there are no boundaries and no borders. one of the things that's going to make it so hard to defeat this group is that they don't see Iraq or Syria anymore. They just see the Islamic State. And as you've said, they're very well funded. They're very well armed. And while they have been put back on their heels by those American airstrikes, they have a lot of popular support among disenchanted Sunnis who believe that ISIS is their path to regaining dignity and power in this part of the world.
But one thing that occurred to me with the president and what he was saying and what you're saying, Terry, is how bad they are and how extreme they are. He was clearly trying to reach out to the rest of the population, possibly for another Sunni awakening during the war in Iraq when Sunnis got together and tried to push out these people.
Absolutely, and there's tremendous amount of work behind the scenes going on in an attempt to reach those tribal leaders and reignite the Sunni awakening. There have been meetings in Jordan and meetings in Turkey. I was in an office where one of the Kurdish officers that I was with actually called up a local Sunni sheikh and said, please come to our side. But right now, it is a hard and ugly fact that there are many Sunni leaders and ordinary Sunnis who are supporting ISIS in these areas, despite this unimaginable level of savagery. In some ways, the atrocities that now the Foley family has suffered and that thousands upon thousands of Syrian and Iraqi families have suffered are a kind of marketing tool that ISIS uses to show the people of this area we are ferocious beyond imagination and we will fight for the Sunni people like no one else. And they attract young men broken by years of war, and they attract funding from Gulf Arab states, too.
Well, this is certainly the first terrorist attack directed at Americans by ISIS. This could be a very long fight. For more on this, join Diane Sawyer on World News tonight. Have a good day.